important is the truth? What would you be willing to sacrifice to find it? Those are two of the big questions asked of us in episode 1 of Silo. Today, I am excited to begin coverage of this amazing dark dystopian TV series on Apple TV. I should mention 2 things before we begin. This is going to be a sort of play-by-play of every important scene, dialogue, clue, and question that I've noticed so far. And it's going to be somewhat like my podcast-style videos. Now, there are a ton of things to say about this show, and I can't possibly cover it all in this one video without it being longer than the episode itself. So we're going to try to move fast and stay focused. I'm going to make separate videos that will dig deeper into some of the theories as well as character dissections, but that's coming later. Second, I haven't read the books that the show is based on, so you don't have to worry about that kind of spoiler happening. I will be reading the books myself later after I've finished the coverage. Speaking of which, I will not spoil the events of future episodes with any information beyond what you see in the current episode. So feel free to jump into the comment section with any observations that you have of your own, but don't spoil future episodes for others. I appreciate it. Oh, and this is the Patreon for the channel. These fine people are our newest executive producers, so special shout out to Epic Phil, Sparrows, Florida Man, and Candace. Thanks for the assist, guys. You're helping me reach my personal goal, and I appreciate that. Check out the Discord here if you want a friendly static space to discuss any of the shows that I cover on the channel. It's free to everyone, and I hope to see you there soon. All right, enough of this intro stuff. Let's get ready to dive. So the story begins with a character named Holston Becker as we watch him prepare for a day of work. This opening sequence is loaded with clues, so take note of a few things that we witness in this very tonally serious scene. We see the wedding ring, indicating that he is married. We watch him place flowers down in front of a mirror that he was just using a minute ago. That should strike us as odd. We also get this shot of him screwing in a grill on a ventilation shaft. Now this is a hint that he's hiding something in here because that's why God made ventilation shafts. All of this becomes relevant later on in the story, so jot this down in the old mental notebook. A somber Holston walks out of his tiny home and into the center of the silo, and this is where we see narration begin in his own voice. While we're listening to that, we are watching a montage of shots of the silo itself. As he's speaking, we're made aware of the sheer size and magnitude of the space inside the silo. The narration immediately begins laying the groundwork for the premise of the story. As we're watching, the narrator is telling us that they don't know why they're there, how long they've been there, or when they'll be able to leave. Now, the silo is a self-contained society. It's cocooned in what appears to be a massive concrete structure that houses a multitude of people. Sheriff Holston passes through what looks like a cafeteria or mess hall, and here he's greeted by one of the workers, letting us know that this is part of his normal routine. We can tell by the familiar nature of the exchange. We get a shot of what appears to be an image of the outside world in the background, and it's looking pretty grim out there. No signs of life, just a desolate, flattened world. Of course, this begs the question, why would anybody want this view? Who wants to be reminded of such a dismal looking scene? Answers incoming. At this moment, Holston's narration states that they don't know when it would be safe to go outside. This indicates that something horrific has happened and it's made life on the outside impossible. Holston continues to his office and we get a shot of him writing a message on a notepad that says double the flowers in front of the mirror, which of course is still a mystery to us. But it does help by reminding us to pay attention to the flowers we saw earlier because their placement actually means something. Holston takes the note, folds it up, and sticks it into a folder. Next, we see a different note, but don't get to see the contents, only the badge that Holston removed and placed on top of it. The taking off of a badge of office usually means a person is shedding off responsibility. They're resigning. Next, we see Holston's colleague, Deputy Marnes, in the office, and he's grabbing a cup of coffee. Holston tells him to meet him in cell 3, to which Marnes responds with confusion. This is another ominous clue that something negative is about to happen. Holston heads into cell 3, locks the gate behind himself, and tosses the key out. He's made up his mind about something very important, but we don't know what yet. We get our answer when we see him standing in the cell staring out of the window at a fallen body in the distance. Clearly, this person means something to him as we see him touching the screen. Now that wedding ring we saw earlier starts to make sense. Marnes' suspicions are confirmed and we can see that he's visibly upset by what he's witnessing. I want to see her, says Holston. I should have done it 3 years ago. This last phrase is very important. It's telling us what Holston's biggest regret is, and this is going to come back to us again at the end of the episode. Holston is adamant despite Marnes' pleas. We learn why when we find out what that phrase actually means. So in the build up to this scene, we learn a whole lot in just a few minutes, but the main takeaway is saying that I want to go out or anything of the sort is taken very seriously. If those words are uttered by any person, then that person must go outside. It's a death sentence. This is our first taste of what the silo has to say about methods of control. We're going to see many examples of this, and I'll try to point them out every time I spot them as we go. As Holston reclines on the cot in his cell, we cut to one of his memories. We get this very brief shot of a woman standing in the very spot he was standing in the cell, when he made his announcement to Marnes. Her eyes are filled with tears, and at her neckline, we can see what she's wearing, and it looks like a locking mechanism for a helmet of some kind. This person is the body outside the window. Halston closes his eyes, the screen fades to black. Roll the intro. A good intro is vital to a story's success, and I thought this one was pretty effective. They managed to make us care about a character we know next to nothing about in a matter of a couple minutes. Props to the production team for pulling this one off. The story starts back up again, but now we've jumped to a different time. We get this sequence of shots of Becker's home, but this time it's fully decorated and it looks lived in. So we're in the past. There's that shot of the vent again, but this time it's surrounded by paintings of Becker's family and his extended family instead of actual photos, which of course begs the question, why aren't there any photos? We'll get an answer to that later too. We get the confirmation that the woman we saw was Halston's wife. Her name is Allison and she's played by Rashida Jones. And these two are in the middle of trying for a baby. Well, getting the clearance to. But all of that hinges on being selected for the privilege of doing so. Allison mentions that they've had 2 chances before this, and she doesn't think they're gonna get another. No pressure. Allison is pleased to see a message pop up on the screen of a very dated looking PC telling them that they've been approved to have a baby. The two are ecstatic. So this establishes that childbirth is heavily controlled in the silo, and probably with good reason. Resource distribution and scarcity issues must be a monumental task in a walled-off city like this. After hearing the good news, the couple makes plans for lunch and to go see the fertility doctor. But on their way out, the screen on the computer switches to a timer indicating that they have exactly 1 year to have this baby or the window closes. Again, no pressure. Word travels fast, and Allison is already being congratulated by people in the cafeteria about her new opportunity, further emphasizing just how big a deal this is in the silo. So during their lunch, we're introduced to a new character. Her name is Gloria, and Halston immediately has this hostile response to her. Gloria claims to be a fertility counselor, and she wants to offer her services to Allison, but Halston protests and threatens her. She seems very eager to talk to Allison. You have to wonder why. But this scene also lets us know that Halston thinks that she's running a con on expecting mothers. Either way, he doesn't want her anywhere near his situation. This is another example of Halston's strict views and his duty-driven personality. Now let's jump to the fertility clinic scene where the conversation informs us that women on the silo take a mandatory surgically inserted kind of birth control that is only removed for those who have been chosen to have children. Now in this scene, we learn that age is a concern for Allison because she's getting close to 40. This puts even more pressure on her to have this baby now because it may be a now or never situation. Notice how the stressors keep piling up. A little change of pace, they head back to the apartment and the hard work of baby making begins. The countdown timer is still tracking time for us, and we can tell that we've jumped a few weeks ahead. We see Allison at her job. She works in the IT division, and this is where we meet her boss, Bernard. He's played by Tim Robbins, and he likes to remind us every chance he gets that he's a towering 6'5". The two have a tense conversation, and you can sum it up as Bernard low-key threatening Allison over an article that she posted to the public about how to recover deleted files. The conversation hints to a history of tension between these two because Bernard thinks Allison is a little too much of a free spirit, and he wants to remind her that he expects her to follow the strict rules set in place. She argues that it's better to put the power in the hands of the people, thereby making IT's job easier. Bernard wants to keep this kind of information limited to people like himself and the department. Drama. Next scene is a good one because it shows us where Halston and Allison differ when it comes to how they view authority and their relationship to it. This particular dynamic is important in understanding their motivations as the story progresses. There are too many rules, according to Allison, and she's asking why aren't they allowed to know more about the history of the silo and its people. She mentions relics. These are objects that predate life in the silo or contain information about the past. These items are illegal and treated as contraband. She mentions that there is an entity known as Judicial which can punish anyone caught with said items, and punishment can include being sent outside. Allison is making some solid points here, and you can tell Halston sees her point of view to a degree, but at the end of the day, he is the law. It's his job to uphold that law and act on its behalf, regardless of how he feels about it. His side of the argument is that the Pact, a set of rules left for the silo to keep things quote-unquote running smoothly, is there to protect people by preventing them from acting on bad ideas that could get everyone killed. Okay, so he means well, but the two reach an impasse on the subject because he won't be moved and she won't relent. This creates a realistic tension between the two. On one hand, you have the intellectually curious scientific mind of Allison versus the duty-bound public representative of the law meant to curb those same curiosities and ensure public safety. This core conflict will divide them going forward. But understand that this tension is not limited to these two characters. It will continue to appear in just about every single conflicting relationship we see throughout the rest of the story. Morality versus the law, truth versus self-preservation. Okay, so let's talk about Mayor Johns for a second. I started out suspicious of her because of the circumstances and who she was. In her first scene, she tells us why the depressing view on the screen exists, and it's because they need it there to remind people to be afraid of the outside, because it encourages obedience within the silo. Fear is the dominant means that the silo uses to keep everyone in line, because fear is a powerful motivator. Not knowing what is going on outside is a powerful reason for people in the silo to follow whatever rules they're given, even if they have doubts. Over to the next scene where Gloria pops up again because she's seeking a moment of privacy with Allison. The ever-curious Allison agrees and the two meet up. Gloria is clearly worried that somebody's listening because we see her turn on the kitchen faucets. She says that she thinks it's judicial that might be listening in. But Gloria starts asking some very heavy questions about who really destroyed the history of their past and why they did it, suggesting that the story they've been told is a lie. So maybe the rebels weren't the bad guys. Interesting. Gloria asks Allison this very provocative question. Do you really think they want someone like you having children? Meaning, someone who is curious and doesn't always obey the rules. This gets Allison thinking. Allison later returns home and tries to broach the subject with Holston, but he dismisses it offhand as if it's a bunch of crazy talk from a crazy person. So far, we can see the story beginning to push Allison and Holston apart in a sort of way, and it's pushing her down a path where her curiosity and suspicions will begin to open doors for her, but once she crosses that line, she can't go back. Some doors are going to close. One such first event is her interaction with a programmer who lives in the middle levels named George Wilkinson. Allison is tasked with responding to a ticket sent to IT about something he needs help with. She decides to go down to the mids to see what the problem is, and this is when the Freedom Day festivities are beginning to commence, and the entire silo is alight with music and banners in anticipation of the celebration. Allison sits and watches a public performance which depicts the so-called rebels versus the freedom fighters play out the story of how the rebels were trying to open the doors to the outside but were defeated by the brave defenders of the silo. Of course, it's for kids, but this is an example of propaganda being intertwined with the idea of patriotism and identity to tell a story. This is meant to reinforce the narrative and quell any suspicions or doubts. The benefit of this to leadership is in how it keeps the denizens of the silo from asking too many questions about the past or wondering who the rebels really were. When Allison reaches George's place, it becomes very clear to her that she's not being called for a regular job. George specifically wanted for her to be sent down to deal with the problem. The problem is something he couldn't publicly disclose without setting off alarm bells. Remember the article she wrote that got her in trouble with Bernard, the one about retrieving deleted files? Well, that's what got his attention, and he felt that she'd be the best person to help him crack this illegal relic, a hard disk drive that he had stashed in his home for some time. George mentions that when the drive is mounted, it appears to be blank, but upon further investigation, it becomes obvious that there's a lot of data on this drive in a hidden directory. Allison's inner engineer is awakened once more, and she's immediately intrigued by the idea of finding out what's hidden on the drive. The two figure out that this drive is unregistered, which makes it even more unusual. The only thing they have to identify it with is the number 18 found in the casing. Stash that one in the mental notebook as well, because it's gonna come up later. Much later. Outside, the mayor's speech is beginning, which is a great backdrop for what's happening inside George's cramped quarters. In exactly 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 6 seconds, well, okay, all right, she begins her speech. The mayor begins to tell the story of the silo and its close call with disaster 140 years prior. She reminds the audience that she and the authority that she represents are the only thing keeping them safe. There is a distinct "only I can save you" tone of speech here, and this should be alarming to us as the audience, but not to the audience on screen. She goes on about how the rebels burned all the books and destroyed all recorded history, but at least they were able to resist those rebels and come out of the conflict with their lives and the silo intact. At this point in the story, I begin to have doubts about her intentions, but I think this is what the writers wanted here. She is the embodiment of legal rational authority, a figure whose power comes from her office as part of a social contract in the same fashion as most world leaders today. Emphasis on most. Okay, fast forward back to Allison and George. Key detail to note here is that magnifying glasses are limited in strength by the pack. This kind of thing only makes sense if the goal is to keep people in the silo from being able to understand or manipulate things on a microscopic level. It's a way of limiting their knowledge. This is why George says that's as strong as they're gonna get, and of course this comes up later in the story too. Once Allison is able to figure out the root directory name on the drive, they're able to get in, and they find thousands of files. They open a file that contains the silo's blueprints, at which point Allison's rational fears begin to take over, and she wants to stop before she sees anything she can't unsee or gets in any trouble. I love the shot of Allison walking through the crowds after she leaves George's place. We watch her moving through the massive crowd of people celebrating Freedom Day, while the implications of what she's done are weighing heavily on her mind. In this way, she becomes isolated. We can imagine how conflicted she is internally. Her husband is the sheriff of the silo, and here she is breaking the law to the extent that would easily get her sent outside. As she wades through the crowd of people cheering on the system that would punish her for what she's done, we get a sense of how isolated she is by her own thoughts and the questions that are burning in her mind. These are thoughts that she can't share with anyone else, not even her husband. George, on the other hand, well, he has no qualms about digging deeper, and soon he discovers a schematic showing that there is a tunnel at the bottom of the silo that seems to be an exit. So you gotta ask, what is the tunnel for? Where does it go? And who else knows about this? Back outside, the crowd begins to sing what almost sounds like a national anthem. Listening to the lyrics of the song got me thinking. The people who apparently wanted the choice to be able to leave the silo are characterized as being against freedom. The people who sought to keep everyone inside are being called the freedom fighters. Orwell would be proud. The story of the silo, as they tell it, it just doesn't add up. In the next scene, Allison is still preoccupied by her thoughts and her recent experience with the hard drive, so she's not in the mood, which leads to an interesting conversation about whether she still wants to have a baby. A key line to pay attention to here is how she responds when she's asked about this. She says that she wanted to have a baby. Past tense. She knows it's not going to happen, but at the same time, she can't tell Holston why, because he won't believe her. Next, we see her Allison again, but this time she goes to George's place because she can't resist finding out what's on those files. What else might it reveal about the silo? I think we can say she's a bit resentful. She no longer trusts leadership at the silo, and she wants to know what else have they been lying about. After spending what was probably hours digging into that drive, she suggests checking out one more file before retiring for the night, and it turns out to be a doozy of a reveal. The director cleverly reveals what's on the screen in the reflection of her glasses, but there's no doubt that what she is looking at appears to be the outside world, only it's paradisaic, the total opposite of the wasteland that they've been used to seeing on these screens. So, is it actually perfect outside? Is it fine to go out and the leaders of the silo have been lying to them all of this time? And if so, why in the world would they do that? This particular file, the Jane Carmody cleaning file, is going to be important from here on out, so add this one to the mental notes. Imagine finding out that everything you believed about the world for your entire life was a lie. That's obviously gonna rock your world. Pardon the pun. Allison doesn't show up for the appointment with the fertility doctor the next morning, so Holston goes out looking for her. He finds her back at the house, and she's not looking well. The faucet is running in the background, letting us know that she's about to tell him what she and Gloria talked about. As Allison explains it, she needed proof before she could tell Holston because she knew he wouldn't believe her otherwise. Allison shows him that she never had the birth control removed by the doctor, and that the whole procedure was meant to prevent them from having the baby without their knowledge. The powerful in the silo do not want people like Allison to have children because they believe her inquisitive nature and willingness to bend the rules makes her a bad model citizen and ultimately a threat to their control. This is another method used by powerful people. Punish anyone who asks too many questions or won't blindly obey the rules. Notice how the imagery in this scene involves the pairing of an apple and a bloody knife on a plate. The apple being a symbol for forbidden knowledge in Western Christian religious belief. The knife, a more direct symbol of death. At this moment in the story, they're being likened to Adam and Eve, and what she's about to tell him is the equivalent of the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. Allison cuts out her own birth control to prove it to Holston. Once she reveals what she's done to her body, Holston hightails it out of there to get some medical attention for her ASAP. Meanwhile, Allison has changed locations and she's now in the cafeteria. She's telling everyone that what they're seeing on the screen is not real, but unfortunately for her, her current state has her looking like she's having a mental breakdown, so the audience doesn't know what to make of her behavior. Holston enters the scene just in time for her to speak the fateful words that would explain that tearful shot of her face earlier in the beginning of the episode. She yells to the entire crowd, "I want to go out." Everyone hears this. This is devastating to Holston, but also to everyone else in the room because they know that she just signed her own death warrant by saying these words. Mayor Johns, Marnes, and Holston convene to try to figure out if there's any strategy that they can use to get her out of trouble. But they conclude that there's nothing they can do. There's no way around it. Another thing to note here is that Holston attributes her behavior to being upset over the baby situation when he's talking to Johns and Marnes, instead of telling them what Allison actually told him. He knows better than to reveal that conversation to anyone else. Also, after being told he should sit it out because it's his wife that's being exiled, Holston refuses, stating that he's sworn an oath and he will do his job no matter how difficult the situation, showing us how dedicated he is to what he stands for. The unfortunate part is that he's pledged his loyalty loyalty to an organization that doesn't deserve it. So now we're closing in on the final scenes of the episode. Holston and Allison have this very important exchange at holding cell 3. Allison tries her best to explain herself to a distraught Holston. She tells him that the screen is a lie and it's meant to control the silo inhabitants, having them believe something that isn't true. Holston still doesn't believe her though, which makes the entire thing even harder for him to accept. The conversation leads to the topic of cleaning the camera lens and why people do it. She explains that everyone who is sent out says they won't clean the lens, but they always end up doing it because once they see what's out there, they want to share that with the people on the inside. Allison makes a deal with Holston. If it really is a wasteland out there, she's not going to clean the lens. But if it really does look like a Windows 10 wallpaper, then she will clean the lens. And then she tells him that if it's true, she'll leave, find help, and come back for him. Next, we get a slow-mo of Allison getting prepped to go outside. Note the camera's intentional focus on the tape being used to seal off parts of the suit. Add this to the mental notebook because it's hugely important later. We also get a shot of the piece of wool placed on the pouch at the waist that's meant to clean the sensor outside. As promised, Holston performs his duty as sheriff, officially condemning Allison to exile as punishment for her words. And of course, this is a tough scene to watch because both Olayowo and Jones do a splendid job in this heart-wrenching moment in the ceremony. When asked what her final words will be, Allison responds with, "I love you." Holston can't bring himself to look at her as the massive airlock door closes on Allison for what will seemingly be her last moments in the silo. Allison proceeds up the ramp to the surface, and as this is happening, the cafeteria is filled with people who want to see what happens next. When outside, we see Allison wipe the screen, proving that she sees what she expected to see, a lush green earth. Holston watches alone on the screen in cell 3, which I think was smart for the director to do because it keeps the intimacy of the moment intact, as opposed to placing him in the cafeteria with everybody else. And it's because of this placement, that moment where she smiles at the sensor, we know that she's smiling at Holston. As Allison tries to leave the area, she gets closer to the bodies that we saw earlier. She stumbles and she falls to the ground. Still faltering, she manages to stand up, giving everyone inside a glimmer of hope, but then she goes down again for the final time. At this point in the story, some questions might come up like, why do they use tape on the suits instead of a proper airtight seal? And could it be that the oxygen tank isn't really oxygen? Also, why did she wipe the window if everything looked fine but still was overtaken by the toxic atmosphere? Something doesn't add up here. As the crowds quietly disperse, the camera stops on George, who looks deep in thought. And fast forward, now we're back to where the story began, and we're looking at that shot of the vent again. This jump cut connects the two scenes, but of course we notice that this time, the decorations that were around it have been removed because this is long after Allison has been gone. The Becker home looks faded and dark, like the light has been stolen from it. At the office, Becker gets word from Marnes that George has died, and it's been alleged that he jumped to his death. Marnes seems to think there's some funny business involved based on the words of an engineer in the lowers who claims it was actually a murder. So Holston, Marnes, and Hank head down to check things out, but the engineer that made the claim can't make the meeting because she's busy dealing with this enormous generator that keeps the entire silo powered. Next, we get a shot of the beating heart of the silo and its caretakers in action. Most importantly, we meet Juliet for the first time, and it's clear that this person is going to be important going forward. Okay, this is the last time we're going to jump in time. We're back to where the story began. Holston is still in cell 3, awaiting his fate. The conversation with Marnes is basically about how Holston is now convinced that his late wife was right all along. Notice that Holston and Marnes' conversation is a mirror of the exact conversation that Allison had with Holston when he did not believe her when she was trying to tell him about what was going on outside. But now Holston does believe, and he's ready to take the big leap. His only regret is that he didn't do it sooner. Alright, well that's it for episode 1. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. This is how I would like to cover the entire series. I think this would be a great way to cover the series, and then we can have a discussion in the comment section about the details. Special thanks, of course, to the patrons of the channel. You guys rock. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Look forward to the next one coming soon. Until then, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.